The deepest, most agonizing wounds are never inflicted by the enemies who openly hate you, but by the family members who claim to love you. An enemy must guess where your weaknesses lie, but your family possesses the exact, intimate coordinates of your soul, knowing precisely where to plunge the blade for maximum devastation. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Plaza Ballroom caught the effervescent bubbles of 1,000 raised champagne flutes, casting a dazzling, fractured light over the city's highest elite. Politicians, billionaires, and industry titans mingled in a sea of silk and tailored tuxedos, their low, velvet murmurs punctuated by the polite, practiced laughter of high society. I stood near the edge of the velvet-draped stage, my fingers lightly tracing the cold, condensation-covered glass of my untouched drink as my heart beat with a strange, heavy rhythm. At 34 years old, I had spent the entirety of my adult life operating in the silent, grinding gears of Carter Enterprises, the multi-billion-dollar global infrastructure empire. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of legacy, a grand gala marking the formal retirement of our family's towering patriarch, my billionaire father, Daniel Carter. Daniel stood at the center of the stage behind a custom mahogany podium embossed with our family crest, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his posture radiating the untouchable authority of a king. To his left stood my older brothers, Matt and Josh, both wearing matching, sickeningly smug expressions that told me they had been keeping a massive, dark secret from me all evening. They adjusted their designer cufflinks and flashed blinding, theatrical smiles at the wall of flashing press cameras, looking every bit like the entitled princes they were raised to be. Daniel cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the state-of-the-art audio system and instantly silencing the sprawling, opulent ballroom. Distinguished guests, lifelong colleagues, and cherished friends, Daniel began, his rich, commanding voice instantly captivating every single soul in the room. For 40 years, I have poured my blood, sweat, and tears into building Carter Enterprises from a local construction firm into a global logistical juggernaut. But a true leader knows when it is time to step back from the throne and allow the next generation to carry the torch of tradition into a new golden age. A wave of enthusiastic applause rippled through the elite crowd, several prominent senators and hedge fund managers nodding in deep, reverent agreement. I felt a faint, hopeful smile touch my lips, thinking of the endless, sleepless nights I had spent over the last decade rescuing our international supply lines from complete collapse. I thought of the brutal, 18-hour workdays where I systematically restructured our failing maritime logistics, quietly saving the family name from an impending, multi-million-dollar public bankruptcy. Therefore, Daniel continued, his ice-blue eyes sweeping across the ballroom before locking onto my brothers with an overwhelming, patriarchal pride. It is my ultimate privilege to announce that effective at midnight, my sons, Matt and Josh Carter, will assume joint control as co-CEOs of Carter Enterprises. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of approval, the clinking of champagne flutes intensifying as my brothers stepped forward to shake our father's hand in a grand, staged display of masculine continuity. I clapped softly, waiting for the moment my name would be called, waiting for the public acknowledgement of the operational brilliance that kept the entire corporate structure from crumbling. Daniel raised his hands to quiet the room once more, his face hardening into an expression of clinical, unyielding coldness as his gaze finally drifted down to where I stood in the shadows. Now, many of you have asked about the future of my daughter, Mia, who has spent the last few years assisting in our operational logistics department, Daniel said, his tone shifting from celebratory to dismissive. While I appreciate her domestic diligence, a global empire of this magnitude requires a fierce, unyielding masculine vision that a woman simply cannot provide. A company built on raw iron and global dominance cannot be guided by emotional frailty or the limited strategic scope of a traditional daughter. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the front rows of the elite crowd, the sudden, heavy silence descending upon the ballroom like a suffocating shroud of ice. Several prominent female executives in the audience stiffened, their expressions morphing into masks of profound discomfort as they stared between my father and me. Therefore, to ensure a clean, unburdened transition of power for my sons, Mia has been completely relieved of her operational duties, and her minority shares have been fully liquidated by the board, Daniel announced coldly. She has been provided with a generous, final severance package, and she will no longer hold any position, title, or authority within the future of Carter Enterprises. Matt and Josh didn't even look at me. They simply offered the crowd an intolerable, self-satisfied smirk, entirely convinced that they had just executed the ultimate corporate execution. They believed they had cleanly excised me from the family legacy, treating me like an inconvenient piece of administrative overhead that needed to be discarded to protect their unearned inheritance. I stood frozen in the flashing lights of the press cameras, feeling the blood completely drain from my face as the suffocating weight of 28,000 elite eyes pressed into my skin. For 12 long years, I had been the invisible backbone of this entire billionaire enterprise, sacrificing my personal life, my health, and my sanity to earn a sliver of my father's respect. When Matt mistakenly lost our primary European shipping permits in a drunken haze 3 years ago, I was the one who flew to Brussels at midnight to legally negotiate a resolution. When Josh foolishly embezzled $4 million from our domestic infrastructure fund to cover his private yacht debts, I was the one who quietly balanced the forensic ledgers to keep him out of a federal penitentiary. My father's toxic obsession with patriarchal tradition had blinded him to the glaring, catastrophic reality that his precious sons were nothing more than reckless, incompetent silver spoon parasites. Daniel genuinely believed that because he owned the name on the building, he owned the structural foundation of the entire empire I had spent a decade quietly securing. A wave of intense, white-hot calm suddenly washed over my chest, replacing the paralyzing humiliation with a sharp, lethal clarity that made my breathing slow to a perfect, steady rhythm. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I refused to give the whispering crowd or my smirking brothers the satisfaction of a public, emotional breakdown. Instead, I set my untouched champagne flute down on a passing silver tray with a soft, deliberate click that felt strangely final. I walked slowly, purposefully toward the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor, the sound echoing through the dead silence of the stunned ballroom. Daniel's eyes narrowed in immediate irritation as I stepped onto the stage, his hand moving instinctively to block the microphone as if he expected me to beg for his mercy. "Mia, do not make a scene in front of the press," my brother Matt whispered through griced teeth, his face flushing with an aggressive, entitled anger. "Security will remove you from this building before you can say a single word, so just take your severance and walk away," Josh sneered, stepping forward to block my path. I ignored them entirely, walking straight past their trembling frames until I stood directly in front of my billionaire father, looking him dead in his cold, arrogant eyes. From the elegant satin clutch bag resting against my wrist, I slowly produced a small, beautifully bound navy blue box, its gold-embossed trim catching the harsh glare of the stage lights. A profound, heavy silence fell over the entire stage, the elite guests leaning forward in their seats, their faces tight with a burning, desperate curiosity as they watched the unfolding drama. I placed the navy box gently on the mahogany podium right on top of his printed retirement speech, offering my father a serene, enigmatic smile that made his eyelids twitch with a sudden, microscopic flicker of unease. "Congratulations on your retirement, Father," I said, my voice carrying a smooth, amplified clarity that easily cut through the dead silence of the ballroom. "Consider this navy box my final operational report, a parting gift to ensure that you and your chosen heirs fully understand the exact nature of the legacy you are inheriting tonight." Daniel frowned, his chest swelling with a defensive, arrogant pride as he looked down at the box with an expression of profound, unbothered contempt. "I don't need your reports, Mia. My sons have a full grasp of our corporate assets and master holdings," Daniel muttered, his voice dripping with patronizing condescension. "Open it, father," I replied softly, my tone carrying a dangerous, quiet authority that forced his hand to move forward despite his overwhelming arrogance. Daniel clicked open the silver latch of the navy box, lifting the lid to reveal 3 meticulously folded, ironclad legal documents stamped with the official seal of the Federal Maritime Commission. As his eyes scanned the first few lines of the top document, the intolerable, self-satisfied smile completely froze on his weathered face, turning into a horrific, pale mask of absolute confusion. The proud, untouchable posture he had maintained all evening suddenly collapsed, his shoulders dropping as a visible tremor began to shake his manicured hands. What is the meaning of this?" Daniel stammered, his voice losing its rich, baritone authority and cracking into a desperate, frightened whisper that carried across the nearest rows of guests. "Matt, Josh, what the hell did you sign 3 years ago during the European logistics restructuring?" he roared, turning his panicked gaze toward my bewildered brothers. Matt and Josh rushed forward, their smug expressions instantly evaporating as they looked over our father's shoulder at the devastating legal documents hidden inside the navy box. What my brilliant, arrogant father completely failed to realize, blinded by his archaic obsession with male heirs, was that Carter Enterprises didn't actually own their own operational lifeline. 3 years ago, when the company was facing total operational paralysis due to my brother's catastrophic mismanagement of our international shipping permits, I had staged a quiet, invisible intervention. To bypass the multi-million-dollar federal fines, I had legally transferred the exclusive, long-term maritime operating licenses into an independent, private holding company called Aegis Logistics LLC. Aegis Logistics LLC was an anonymous entity registered entirely in my name, a private corporate fortress that I had built using my own personal capital and independent intellectual property patents. For the last 36 months, Carter Enterprises had merely been leasing their global shipping lanes, their automated freight tracking systems, and their primary customs clearance codes from my private firm. The documents inside that Navy box were official, non-negotiable notices of immediate lease termination and the permanent deactivation of all digital operating licenses effective at midnight. By publicly firing me and liquidating my operational position, they had automatically triggered an ironclad breach of trust clause embedded deep within those master logistics frameworks. In exactly 82 minutes, the entire global infrastructure of Carter Enterprises would be completely, totally blind, unable to legally move a single container ship or freight truck across any international border. "Mia, you can't do this. This is corporate sabotage," Josh screamed, his face turning a violent, dangerous shade of crimson as he lunged toward the podium. "We will see you for every single dollar you own. The board will have you indicted by tomorrow morning," Matt roared, his voice cracking with a pure, unadulterated panic. I leaned forward, resting my hands lightly on the edge of the podium, letting the entire ballroom see the cold, calculating mind of the daughter they had just publicly dismissed. "You can't sue an independent entity for choosing to terminate a voluntary leasing agreement with a company that no longer possesses an operational operations manager," I said calmly. "And as for the board, I suggest you look toward the back of the room, because the major institutional investors are already reading the formal legal copies my attorneys filed with the SEC 20 minutes ago." At the back of the ballroom, a chaotic, violent wave of motion suddenly erupted as several prominent hedge fund managers and majority shareholders began frantically typing on their phones. The public corporate data feeds were already reflecting the news, and within seconds, the pre-market stock valuation of Carter Enterprises began a historic, vertical plunge into the floor. Daniel looked down at the navy box, then up at the flashing cameras of the press, his proud, billionaire legacy turning to absolute ash in front of the very elite society he had sought to impress. He slumped against the mahogany podium, his breathing shallow and ragged as he realized that his precious, entitled sons had just inherited a completely hollow, bankrupt shell of an empire. "Mia, please," Daniel whispered, his voice entirely devoid of pride, his eyes filled with a desperate, sniveling plea as he reached out a trembling hand toward my arm. "We are a family. Your grandfather's name is on that building. We can rewrite the transition papers tonight. You can have the CEO title." I stepped back out of his reach, smoothing the front of my dress with slow, deliberate care, looking at him with the total, devastating neutrality of a stranger. A company built on raw iron and global dominance cannot be guided by emotional frailty, father. Those were your exact words, I reminded him with an icy, flawless smile. Good luck navigating a global shipping empire without a single legal permit or a digital tracking system to your name. I turned on my heel and walked off the stage, my head held high as the flashing press cameras captured the final, legendary exit of the daughter who had just dismantled a billionaire dynasty. The walk out of the Grand Plaza Ballroom was the most peaceful, liberating moment of my entire life, the frantic shouting of my ruined brothers fading into a distant, insignificant murmur behind me. The very next morning, the fallout from the Grand Retirement Gala swept through the global financial sector like a devastating, unmitigated Category 5 hurricane. Carter Enterprises was plunged into immediate, total operational paralysis as 42 massive cargo vessels were forced to drop anchor outside international ports, unable to legally clear customs. The commercial banks, utterly terrified by the sudden, complete disappearance of the company's operating licenses, immediately froze all of my father's corporate credit lines. The board of directors launched an emergency, scorched earth internal investigation, quickly uncovering the full, staggering scale of Matt and Josh's historical embezzlement and operational fraud. Within 48 hours, the board officially executed a vote of no confidence, stripping my brothers of their unearned co-CEO titles before they had even finished unpacking their new offices. Daniel was forced out of his own retirement suite in total disgrace, his name becoming a permanent, laughing cautionary tale of patriarchal arrogance throughout the entire business world. A month later, I sat in the sprawling, sunlit boardroom of my brand-new executive headquarters, looking out over a gorgeous panorama of the city's international shipping harbor. The space was filled with natural light, modern mahogany, and a vibrant, laughing energy that was completely free from the toxic tyranny of the Carter family name. Arthur Pendleton, who had resigned from my father's board in pure disgust the morning after the gala, sat to my right, holding a cup of morning coffee with a warm, proud smile. Lana, the restructuring firm handling the bankruptcy liquidation of Carter Enterprises, just submitted their final, desperate offer, Arthur murmured, sliding a digital folder across the table. They are willing to sign over the entirety of the physical assets, the commercial real estate holdings, and the primary manufacturing hubs for pennies on the dollar to satisfy their debts. I opened the folder, reviewing the financial data with the sharp, clinical precision of a woman who finally owned the entirety of the kingdom she had built. Accept the offer, Arthur, but ensure that the transition papers contain an ironclad, permanent clause barring Daniel, Matt, and Josh from ever entering any facility or owning a single share, I replied evenly. My phone buzzed softly on the desk, displaying a lengthy, pathetic voicemail from my brother Matt, begging for a meeting, crying about how our father was facing a severe federal indictment for bank fraud. He pleaded for financial assistance to cover their mounting legal fees, writing that they were completely broke after the commercial banks seized their personal luxury properties. I didn't feel a single ounce of anger or hatred or even a sense of petty triumph as I stared at the flashing digital notification on my screen. I slowly clicked the permanently delete button, completely erasing his desperate voice from my device and his entire toxic presence from my beautiful, limitless future. I turned my gaze back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching a massive, newly branded Aegis cargo vessel slide effortlessly out into the deep blue water of the open ocean. I had honored my true potential not by allowing myself to be crushed by their archaic entitlement, but by having the brilliant, strategic foresight to know my own immense worth. I stood up from the table, walking forward to join my elite operational team as we prepared to launch our new global network into a flawless, triumphant, and entirely independent tomorrow.